I'm Emily Dawson, and 5 days ago, I got fired for trying to save my company from the biggest cybersecurity breach of its life. They didn't just ignore me, they erased me. But 24 hours later, the Pentagon called. Not them, me. Let me take you back. It was 3:27 a.m. when I noticed it. A login session from an IP address that didn't exist. Not in the dev environment, not in the testing sandbox, not even in the ghost network we barely admitted existed. It was surgical, deliberate, and invisible to everyone but me. Because I'd been at Apex Logic for 9 years. I knew the heartbeat of our systems better than I knew my own. I sat up, heart pounding, staring at the metadata trail left behind. There wasn't supposed to be a trail. No user ID, no NFA challenge, no authentication token. Just silence where a wall should have stood. I found the breach nested inside a new vendor integration, Skyrex, a flashy API our CTO Dave had bulldozed through QA because it made his reports look sexy. I'd raised concerns when it went live. He brushed me off with the charm of a man who thinks charisma can cover incompetence, so I documented everything. Timestamps, logs, footprints, a step-by-step walkthrough of the exploit. I stayed up all night writing a plain English report, the kind even non-tech execs could understand. At 1:49 a.m., I sent it to Dave with a calm note, flagging something unusual. Needs review. The next morning, Dave didn't even open the report. He smirked, told me I was overreacting, said not to panic the team with hypotheticals. When I escalated to Leonard Matt, our IT director, I got a one-line reply. A zest. Non-threat. Don't bypass your manager again. 60 seconds. That's how long it took them to dismiss it. The next morning I was terminated. No hearing. No defense. Just a cold HR meeting, a cardboard box, and a severance NDA I refused to sign. Because I wasn't wrong, and I wasn't done. 24 hours later, every major news outlet was reporting it. A federal cyber attack traced back to a third-party vendor, Skyrex, our vendor, and the flaw, the exact one I flagged. My phone rang before breakfast. It wasn't a reporter. It wasn't even the board. It was the Department of Defense. And they didn't want to speak to Apex Logic. They asked for me by name. The emergency board meeting was set within the hour. No more brushed-off emails. No more middle managers playing gatekeeper. This time, I was on the call, and they were all listening. 13 faces on screen, some in suits, some in panic. All of them suddenly realizing the emotional. Analyst they fired might be the only person who understood how deep this hole went. They asked me to walk them through it. So I did. I shared my screen and laid it all out, the invisible backdoor, the masked root access, the ghost session that left no logs, the integration module Dave had forced through like a wrecking ball. Silence. Until a voice from the Pentagon said, "This matches the breach signature exactly." Then he turned to Apex Logic CEO, Tom Whitaker, and asked, why was the only person who caught this removed from the company? Tom choked out something about communication breakdowns. Matt stammered about perceived threat levels. Dave tried to crack a joke about hindsight, and I just watched them unravel. They'd buried the report, gaslit the analyst, protected their careers, and now they were watching their house burn. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just sat there with the same calm they once mistook for passivity. The same voice they once ignored now held the entire room in place. Then came the offer. "Miss Dawson, we'd like to formally invite you back to lead remediation and interface with our federal partners." I paused. Then I said, "On my terms." I didn't return to Apex Logic with a badge. I returned with leverage. The same conference room where they fired me. I walked into it 3 days later, different dress code, different tone. No more apologies from me. No more power games from them. Tom Whitaker, the CEO, stood to greet me. The same man who hadn't looked me in the eye before now couldn't stop wringing his hands. "Emily, first let me say, on behalf of the board, we deeply regret how your concerns were handled. Mistakes were made. I held up a hand. I'm not here for regret. I'm here to rebuild. But we do it my way." I laid it out clean, each demand like a chess move they couldn't counter one. My title, Director of Systems Integrity. I report directly to the board. No intermediaries, no filters, no Dave. 2. My authority, full control over infrastructure auditing, vendor vetting, and protocol enforcement. I'm not suggesting anymore, I'm deciding. 3. My team, I hire who I trust. The ones who flagged red alerts while others toasted quarterly bonuses. 4. Compensation. Triple my original base salary. Equity, no bureaucratic delays when it comes to security spend. 5. Accountability, Dave and Matt. Terminated, not reassigned. Not silenced with golden parachutes. Fired, loudly. There was a pause so long I could hear the hum of the air vent. Then Evelyn Moore, the board director who called me after the breach, spoke. She gets it. And just like that, the new Apex logic began. They handed me the keys. Not just to an office, but to the entire architecture. First thing I did, pull every log, every session, every line of code that had touched Skyrex. I assembled a war room, real engineers this time, not the yes men Dave used to promote his pet projects. We worked in shifts 20 hours straight. Sleep came in naps under conference tables. I didn't care. We were sealing the wound before it bled again. And it wasn't just about fixing the flaw anymore. It was about exposure. Because the breach hadn't just slipped through a vulnerability. It had been invited, enabled. Dave had forced Skyrex into production over objections from QA, from compliance, from me. Matt had bypassed protocol to fast-track the rollout. And now the federal investigation was circling like hawks. I made sure every thread led back to them. I didn't need revenge. I needed truth. Documented. Signed, delivered. Within 72 hours, internal statements were subpoenaed. Emails surfaced, Slack logs, recordings, and suddenly everyone remembered my name. They tried to spin it, of course. Press releases blamed a third-party miscommunication. Investors were told Apex was undergoing rapid restructuring. The CEO gave a trembling interview in front of an American flag backdrop, promising deep reflections on corporate integrity. But the truth was louder, because I published a paper. The exploit that should have been a warning. No sensationalism. Just raw, clean analysis of how it happened, how it could have been prevented. How someone like me, tired, overlooked, barely hanging on, sounded the alarm and was silenced for it. It went viral. LinkedIn, Hacker News, Forbes picked it up. Even Wired reached out. I wasn't just a ghost in the machine anymore. I was the firewall. The fame didn't feel like victory. Not at first. People kept calling me a whistleblower, a cybersecurity heroine, a symbol of resilience. But none of those labels captured what was actually happening inside me. Because under the headlines, under the new title and corner office, I was still angry, still bruised, not just because they fired me, but because of how easily they did it. How little resistance the system had to betrayal. They didn't even debate it. They didn't hesitate. The people I'd shared years of emails and small talk with. The ones who signed my birthday card, who praised my work in performance reviews, watched me get pushed out the door like I was toxic waste. And now they were sending me congratulations. No, I didn't want applause. I wanted them to feel what it was like to be invisible. But I didn't show that. Not on the outside. On the outside, I wore the armor-pressed suits, sharp language, clean slides, and a face that didn't flinch. I led the remediation like a machine, unemotional, precise, effective. Because if I showed even a crack, I knew what they'd say. Emotional, hard to work with. Maybe she wasn't fired for the report. Maybe it was her attitude. I'd seen it before. Women in tech who raised flags got turned into warnings themselves. So I played their game, only better. I didn't just fix the vulnerability. I rewrote the protocols, built new oversight channels, created a clear whistleblower path, one where people like me couldn't be quietly erased. I didn't just survive the system, I rewired it. And yet, every time I sat in my office alone, a voice still whispered, "They would have let you rot." That's the part no one tells you about vindication. It's not relief. It's not satisfaction. It's just proof that you were right about how wrong everything was. So I stayed sharp. I kept the receipts. Because even though I had power now, I never forgot how fast they took it from me. 3 months into my new role, the systems were finally stable. No more ghost logins, no more backdoors, no more late-night pings that made my stomach knot. I should have felt proud, triumphant even. Instead, I felt watched, not by the systems, but by the people. Because the deeper I went, the clearer it became fixing the code wasn't enough. The real breach had always been human. I found messages, buried Slack threads, internal memos from execs, ones that never made it into the official audit, quiet acknowledgments that, last, the Skyrex deployment bypassed safeguards. And yes, legal reviewed the risk and greenlit it anyway. And no, we don't tell the board unless it leaks. It hadn't just been Dave and Matt. It had been all of them. The CTO, the CO, even Tom, the CEO who now liked to pretend he'd had my back the whole time. They didn't ignore the warning because they didn't understand it. They ignored it because acting on it would have cost them a bonus. I remember sitting at my desk that night, lights low, server logs humming quietly, reading the words that confirmed what I had already guessed. If we acknowledge the risk, we own the fallout. It wasn't negligence. It was strategy. That's when something broke open inside me. Not fear, not even anger. Something deeper. A cold, clean clarity. I couldn't just be the firewall anymore. I had to be the mirror. They had built a culture where silence was rewarded, where the loudest voices were the least informed, where compliance was king and truth was a liability. I was going to shatter that mirror and make them look. The next morning, I sent a confidential memo to the board. No preamble, no pleasantries. Subject: internal knowledge of breach vulnerability, executive risk exposure, attached 7 files, 3 Slack logs, 2 internal emails, 1 compliance matrix. Summary: there is sufficient documented evidence that multiple senior staff were aware of the exploit prior to its weaponization. This represents not only an ethical failure but a legal one. I recommend immediate review and voluntary disclosures before external investigators connect the dots. I signed it plainly, Emily Dawson, Director of Systems Integrity. Then I hit send. I sat back, spine straight, coffee going cold beside me, and waited. Because this time, I was the ticking clock, and they were the ones running out of time. By noon, my inbox was on fire. 3 missed calls from Tom, 2 from legal, 1 from an outside counsel I hadn't even heard of yet. The board wasn't just shaken, they were scrambling. By 3:00 p.m., I was summoned to an executive strategy alignment meeting. Translation damage control. The conference room was full this time. No video tiles. No distant voices. Just bodies in seats, real, squirming, guilty bodies. People who had once rolled their eyes at my risk memos now sat upright like schoolkids, called to the principal's office. Tom opened the meeting. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of tone that says, let's be adults about this while we try not to drown in our own mess. Emily, first off, thank you. We all appreciate the thoroughness of your report. He said it like a compliment, like I'd turned in a well-written book report, not like I'd just handed them the smoking gun they thought they'd buried. I nodded but said nothing. Then Evelyn, yes. The same board director who had called me after the Pentagon fallout spoke. Her tone was different. Cold steel beneath corporate velvet. We've reviewed your attachments. The implications are serious. We're moving to place 2 senior executives on leave pending investigation. There it was. 2. Not all. Not even most. Just enough to signal action, not enough to truly clean house. I looked around the table. I saw the glances, the calculations, the silent negotiations happening behind every blink. These people still thought they could contain this. And that's when I made the decision. It's not enough, I said. Calm. Steady rect. Tom blinked. Emily, no. You don't get to manage this like a PR crisis. This isn't a leak you patch with a press release. This is rot. Silence. You want my help. I'll give it. But I'm not just auditing your systems anymore. I'm auditing you. Every department. Every risk approval pipeline. Every fast-track deployment. I want access to everything. Tom's voice was low, nervous. That's a significant escalation. So was the breach. And you're lucky I'm not sitting across from a federal committee right now, reading your Slack threads out loud. Evelyn smiled faintly. She was the only one who didn't look surprised. Let her do it, she said to the room. You brought her back to protect the company. Let her. I didn't wait for consensus. I stood up, slid the hard copy of my risk map across the table, and left the room without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of stress, out of strategy. Because now I understood this wasn't about saving Apex logic anymore. It was about transforming it, or burning it down so something better could be built from the ashes. And if I had to drag every complicit coward into the light to do it, so be it. They wanted a firewall. They got me. Now I was the whole damn system. The next morning, I showed up 2 hours earlier than everyone else. Not because I had something to prove, because I wanted to feel the building before it woke up. The same elevators, same bland gray carpet, same hollow lobby echoing with fake modern jazz. But something was different. Me. I wasn't walking in as a discarded analyst with a cardboard box. I was walking in as the storm, and every person I passed seemed to know it. They didn't meet my eyes. They offered nervous nods, whispered after I passed. I didn't need to demand respect. I had become the consequence. I claimed the old CTO's office. Still smelled like ego and cologne. His nameplate was already gone. I brought nothing personal with me. No family photo, no mug, no plants. Only my laptop and a printed copy of the original report. It sat on the desk like scripture. Then I opened a blank page and started outlining Phase 1, total visibility. I gave myself 30 days to map every data pathway, every approval loophole, every misused integration. No more shadow IT, no more vendor shortcuts. And if someone had a problem with it, they could bring it to the new director of systems integrity. Me. But the real tension wasn't outside the room. It was inside me. Because power changes people. And I was terrified that I might become what I hated. It's easy to see villains in other people. Harder when you feel yourself stepping into their shoes, watching people go quiet when you enter a room, realizing that every word you say now echoes louder than it should. I started second-guessing my tone in emails, wondering if I was being too direct, too cold. I had fought so hard to be heard, but now every sentence I spoke became a directive. And deep down, part of me liked it. That scared me more than anything. That night, alone in the office again, I pulled up the security feed from the day I was fired. The moment I was escorted out, the way Dave had smirked, the way Marlene from HR didn't meet my eyes, I paused the video, and I made a promise. I wouldn't let this new power make me forget that version of me. The one who stood alone. The one who didn't flinch when the system turned on her. The one who chose truth, even when it cost everything. That version of me built the firewall. Now I had to become the architect of something stronger. Not just a safer system, a braver one. I chose to follow the whispers. There'd been a line in one of the breach logs, something almost identical to the anomaly I found. But the timestamp was older, weeks older. I dug into the archive, and there it was, a vulnerability report, dated 6 weeks before mine. Filed by someone named Mark Liu, a junior security engineer on the West Coast team. His report was clear, concise, and terrifying. Not as technically detailed as mine, but it flagged the same access tunnel, same risk, same third-party vendor. The metadata told me everything I needed to know. He had reported it to legal, not to IT, not to Dave, directly to legal, and they buried it. The discovery hit harder than I expected. It meant someone had tried to raise the alarm before me, and had been erased so thoroughly I never even knew his name. Mark didn't even work at Apex Logic anymore. His employee profile was marked voluntary departure, except I found a memo. Exit due to performance concerns and lack of team cohesion. The same language they used on me. Suddenly, my rage had a shape, a pattern. This wasn't a mistake. It was a process. I pulled the email thread from legal. It made me sick. Do not escalate. Risk appears speculative. Potential brand impact not worth triage effort. They had weighed his warning against the company's public image and decided silence was safer. I stared at the screen, fists clenched, not just for me, for him. For every name scrubbed out of the version of history they were trying to write, I found Mark's LinkedIn. No activity in months. Last job, freelance tech consultant. He had disappeared, but I couldn't let his warning die in silence. I brought the evidence to the board, not in an email, in person. I walked into that meeting room with a printed folder titled, Ignored Warnings, the Case of Mark Liu. The room fell silent as I laid it on the table. I wasn't the first to find the breach, I said, but I'm going to be the last person you ignore. One of the board members reached for the file. I stopped him. I'm not here for curiosity. I'm here for accountability. They looked at me like I had just thrown a live grenade on the table. And maybe I had. Because I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was rewriting the rules for everyone who'd been silenced. It wasn't just curiosity. It was responsibility. If they had erased him once, they could do it again. And I needed the truth from him. His last known address was a co-working space in Oakland. I booked a flight, packed light, and didn't tell anyone. Not even the board. Something about this part of the story had to remain mine. When I arrived, the receptionist didn't know him, but an old business card had his name taped to a second-floor locker. Faded, peeling, like the memory of a life no one claimed. I left a note. It said, simply, "You were right. They buried us both. Call me." I didn't expect him to respond, but that night my phone rang. His voice was cautious, dry, like someone who hadn't spoken their own truth in a long time. "Emily, Mark, you found it too?" I did. Silence. Then, I thought I was crazy. "You weren't." He let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his lungs for a year. We met the next morning. A corner booth at a diner that smelled like overcooked bacon and stale coffee. He looked tired. Older than his photo, younger than his eyes. We didn't talk like strangers. We talked like survivors. He showed me his original documentation, the raw logs, the email chains, everything they'd scrubbed. I showed him mine. When I slid my report across the table, he stared at it for a long time. Then he whispered, "You did it better than I could have. They had to listen to you." "No," I said, "they didn't. Until the Pentagon did. What they did to Mark wasn't just negligence. It was a betrayal. Of his integrity, of his voice. Of the quiet warning he tried to send before the storm broke. I made a decision right then. When I returned to Apex Logic, I wouldn't just fix the breach. I'd expose the system that allowed it to happen. Mark agreed to go on record. I gave him a place on my team. And the next day, I walked into the office with the second chair in my corner office. For the man they tried to make invisible. The internal audit began quietly. Just a request. Just a memo. Just a click of a button that unlocked 9 years of buried digital dust. I didn't call it an investigation. Yet, I called it systems reconciliation. A harmless name. One that didn't sound like it was about to tip a company sideways. But that's what it was. Because every security report, every bug flagged and dismissed, every compliance concern buried under quarterly OKRs was still there, just ignored. And now I had full access, so I read everything. Mark and I worked late into the night for weeks. Cross-checking logs, interviewing former engineers, reconstructing data trails long since overwritten. The more we uncovered, the more obvious it became I wasn't the first. I wasn't even the 10th. They'd silenced interns, red-lined QA comments, and pushed deployments that failed security reviews with red stamps labeled, "Too late to revert." And every time someone raised a flag, someone like me, they were restructured, reassigned, or like Mark, quietly pushed out with a performance pivot plan. It wasn't just negligence, it was policy, and that broke something in me. Because I believed in systems, in reporting lines, in change tickets, in the idea that truth, when properly documented, mattered. But here I was, buried under a mountain of proof that said otherwise. It wasn't just Apex Logic that was vulnerable. It was the entire mindset of modern tech leadership, velocity over vigilance, hype over hygiene, speed over security. I didn't want revenge. I wanted revelation. So I did something bold. I wrote a white paper, not under Apex Logic's banner. Under mine. It was called The Ghost in the Stack: How Institutional Silence Becomes Cyber Risk. It didn't name names, but it told the story of me, of Mark, of the other engineers whose warnings were lost in Slack threads and brushed aside in sprint retros. It went viral within 48 hours. And that's when the media came calling. CNN, then Forbes, then Wired. By day 3, I had 15 missed calls, a LinkedIn inbox full of messages from whistleblowers across every tech sector, and one voicemail that stopped my heart cold. This is Special Counsel Denise Hart with the Senate Committee on Cybersecurity Oversight. Miss Dawson, we've read your paper. We'd like to invite you to testify. Testify. The word didn't feel real until I heard it a second time. This time, from the CEO's assistant, breathless and rattled. Tom needs to speak with you. Now. It's urgent. I didn't answer, because Tom had had his chance, and he chose silence. That night, the Apex Logic press team released a carefully worded statement. We are committed to ongoing security improvements. We support transparency and innovation. No mention of the breach. No mention of the NDA they tried to force me to sign. No mention of the people they fired for telling the truth. But the internet noticed. Screenshots of internal memos started surfacing. One former engineer posted a redacted code snippet with the caption, "Emily warned them." So did we. Within hours, a ghost in the stack was trending. The pressure cooker finally burst. Day 5. Congressional hearing. Live stream. Millions watching. I walked into the hearing room in a charcoal suit that didn't quite fit, palms sweating but back straight. The air was tense, like a courtroom before the verdict drops. Senator Hart leaned forward, microphone glowing red. Miss Dawson, in your own words, what went wrong at Apex Logic? I didn't look at the board members in the front row. I looked at the camera. At the thousands of engineers who'd messaged me. At every woman who'd been called too intense for doing her job well. At every whistle no one heard. And I said, they didn't fail because of code. They failed because of culture. Because telling the truth became more dangerous than ignoring it. Gasps, pens scribbling, flashbulbs. I continued. I reported the flaw that opened a door to federal systems. They didn't fix it. They fired me. And they thought that would be the end. I looked directly at the CEO, but it wasn't. And in that moment, I felt it not vindication. Power. Not because I tore anyone down, but because I proved that truth, no matter how buried, can still surface, still break through the lies, and still burn bright enough to light the whole damn system. 3 weeks later, everything had changed. Except me. I still drank the same cheap black coffee. Still wore my hair in the same messy braid. But now, when I walked into rooms, they stood up, not out of politeness, out of respect. The breach became the tipping point for something bigger. A full audit of every third-party integration across federal tech infrastructure. Emergency protocols rewritten. 2 tech CEOs resigned, 4 more were disappointed in me. I wasn't just a headline anymore. I was the catalyst. I had been offered jobs, dozens of them, 6-figure bonuses, titles like Chief Trust Officer, handwritten notes from VPs I'd never met. We admire your courage. Come build with us. We need voices like yours. But I didn't say yes. Not yet. Because beneath the applause, I could still feel the scars. Not the firing, the erasure. The way they rewrote my story while it was still happening. Turned my warnings into emotional reactions. Framed silence as professionalism. I wasn't just fighting for my job anymore. I was fighting for every analyst, tester, and quiet observer who saw something wrong and got punished for being right. So I launched something of my own. Not a startup, a standard, a coalition of ethical engineers, watchdogs, and policy shapers. We called it GCHUS, a global hub for operational security transparency. We didn't just report vulnerabilities. We trained people to speak up. We gave them legal resources, anonymous drop boxes, and public channels that no executive could delete. And the best part, our first major supporter wasn't a tech firm. It was a federal agency, the same one that ignored Apex Logic just weeks earlier. Because once the world saw what nearly broke, they finally understood who held it together. It started with one case, then came 20, then 100. People began forwarding their own stories, whistleblowers, anonymous devs, security interns with nowhere to turn. Some were small, a hidden script, an unpatched backdoor, a manager brushing off a red flag. Others weren't. One came from a senior engineer at a medical AI startup. Their system was recommending incorrect dosages, and the executives knew. Another flagged a voting software vendor quietly disabling audit logs during tests. They didn't need fame, they needed safety. And now they had us. Ghost wasn't a company, it was a shield. And I, Emily Dawson, was no longer the woman they fired. I was the one they couldn't silence. But power invites pressure. And soon it got personal. My inbox overflowed with NDA threats, back-channel intimidation, even 2 accidental credit score downgrades. One night I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was taken, but something had been moved. A single post-it on my desk monitor. No words. Just a smiley face. That's when I knew we were shaking the right walls. So I tightened security, moved my data offline, and kept going. Because what scared them most was that I hadn't gone away. I had evolved. And then came the call I wasn't expecting. A young developer from Apex Logic, nervous, quiet. He asked to meet. We sat on a park bench, no laptops, no phones, just wind and distance. He leaned in and whispered, "It's still there. The vulnerability. Skyrex patched one entry point, but the root access layer, it's still active. Just hidden deeper." I stared at him. Heart pounding. They hadn't fixed it. They knew it wasn't fixed. And they were betting no one would dig far enough to find it again. They forgot one thing. I don't quit. It began as a whisper in the code. But now it roared like thunder through every wire they thought they controlled. I didn't call the media. I didn't have to. One of our ghost partners, a quiet analyst at a federal contractor, had fed the vulnerability into a controlled simulation. It replicated itself. Autonomously. Skyrex wasn't just insecure. It was alive in the network, buried so deep it had nested into infrastructure no one dared to map. Critical infrastructure. Water, power, defense. The kind of places where silence means sabotage. I compiled the results into a dossier, 47 pages. Timestamps, behavior trees, injection signatures. I sent it to one person, Senator Halloran, chair of the Senate Cybersecurity Oversight Committee. The subject line: "Your re-election campaign depends on what you do with this." I knew she'd read it. She did. 2 days later, subpoenas dropped. Apex Logic executives were summoned. Skyrex offices were raided. The news broke at 6:12 a.m. on a Tuesday, and by 6:13 my phone exploded. Pings from whistleblowers, lades, praise threats. But most of all, validation. They had tried to paint me as a paranoid technician. Now I was the architect of accountability. And as I stood in my modest apartment, lights off, laptop glowing in the dark like a quiet fire, I felt something I hadn't in months. Not triumph, not pride, readiness, because this wasn't the end of the war. It was the beginning of the reckoning. The Senate hearing wasn't a trial, but it felt like Judgment Day. Marble columns, cameras rolling, microphones hot, truth radioactive. The room was packed, senators, aides, cybersecurity experts in pressed suits, and reporters practically foaming for a headline. And there, seated under the carved seal of the United States Senate, me. Not in chains, not as a warning, as a witness. Across the aisle, Dave Kilpatrick, Leonard Matt, and the CEO of Apex Logic, Thomas Bell. All 3 looked like they'd aged 10 years in 1 week. Dave's smug golf tan had faded to a pasty white. Matt blinked like he'd never seen light before. And Bell, he wore his tie like a noose. The gavel hit. Senator Halloran leaned in, her voice like flint on steel. "Ms. Dawson, for the record, did you report the Skyrex vulnerability before it was exploited in the federal breach?" I didn't flinch. Yes. In writing. With full documentation. It was dismissed within 60 seconds. Gasps, flashes, A senator cursed under her breath. I turned my head slowly to face the Apex trio. Their eyes wouldn't meet mine, because they knew what was next. Do you have those reports, Ms. Dawson? I do, including audit logs, video walkthroughs, and a Slack thread where Dave Kilpatrick referred to the issue as, quote, Emily chasing ghosts again. Gasps again. This time louder. Dave's lips moved, but no words came out. The committee entered it into record, and just like that, it was public, irrefutable, permanent. They questioned me for 2 hours, and I answered every one. I spoke clearly, calmly, never raising my voice, because I didn't have to. Truth doesn't need to shout. But the most powerful moment wasn't mine. It came when Senator Halloran turned to Apex's CEO and asked, Mr. Bell, do you know how many critical systems were penetrated due to this flaw? He hesitated. 19. Halloran's voice cut sharper. And how many of them were flagged by your own analyst? Silence. She didn't wait. All of them. Emily Dawson saw it first. She gave you a way out. You gave her the door. That was the end of the hearing, but not the end of their story. 1 week later, Apex Logic was placed under federal oversight. Dave and Matt were banned from government contracting, and I was offered a role I never imagined. Chief Integrity Officer, Department of Cybersecurity Enforcement, Federal. Unfireable. And the first person I hired on my new team, a young analyst named Priya. Quiet, smart, overlooked, just like I once was. She caught something in a recent log, a small echo of a larger threat, and this time, we listened. Because the lesson of the breach wasn't just about code, it was about culture. Systems fail when people stop listening to the quiet voices. I was once that voice now. I amplify them. So, what's the lesson here? It's not just about cybersecurity. It's about courage. It's about what you do when you see the truth, and the people in charge tell you to shut up. Emily Dawson wasn't some tech prodigy. She wasn't after glory. She was just right. And being right in the wrong room is dangerous. They tried to silence her, tried to erase her. But here's the thing about erasing people: you can't delete integrity. You can fire it. You can blacklist it. You can even bury it under NDAs and severance checks. But it never disappears. It waits, it documents, it builds leverage. And when the time comes, it wins. To anyone watching this, maybe you're like Emily. You're the quiet one in the room, the one who spots what others miss. You've been called paranoid, too intense, not a team player. Maybe you've been told to back down, to focus on the positive, to stop rocking the boat. Let me tell you something: boats that never get rocked sink silently. So speak up, even if your voice shakes, even if no one listens yet. Because one day, that voice might be the only thing standing between collapse and salvation. If this story hit home, share it. Someone out there needs to know they're not crazy for caring too much. Someone needs to feel seen. And if you've ever stood up and been punished for doing the right thing, drop a comment below, tell us your story. This channel is for you, for the truth tellers, the whistleblowers, the ones they tried to silence. Because in the end, you weren't the problem. You were the firewall. Subscribe for more stories like this. Let's keep building a world where integrity doesn't get fired. It gets promoted.